The night should have ended with music. The crowd roared, voices rising in waves of excitement as Lisa Cousin stood victorious, her words sharper than any blade, her confidence an unforgivable sin. She had owned the stage, dismantling her opponents with effortless precision, her rhymes cutting deep into their pride. Outside, the cold wind cut through the empty streets of Mount Hermon, Louisiana. Lisa pulled her jacket tighter, her breath forming pale clouds in the night air. The echoes of her triumph still rang in her ears, the energy of the battle still humming in her veins. She had dominated, and the crowd had loved her for it. But in the darkness beyond the streetlights, resentment festered. Roby Donald, Darrell Cannon, and Carlos LaBounty stood in the shadows, their faces masked with forced smiles. Moments ago, they had stepped onto that stage certain of their victory. They had expected the crowd to cheer for them, to revel in their clever wordplay and dominance. But Lisa had stripped them bare, exposing their weaknesses, flipping their boasts against them, reducing them to nothing more than afterthoughts in her performance. She had laughed, not cruelly, but with the confidence of someone who knew she had won. For men like them, that laughter was unbearable. It wasn't just defeat. It was humiliation. And humiliation demanded retribution. Welcome to Crime Wave Stories HQ. I want to thank all my viewers, especially my subscribers, for your continued support as we strive to improve and bring you daily updates on both told and untold crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Lisa walked toward her car, still buzzing with excitement. She never noticed the way the three men followed, their whispers blending into the night. The moon hung high above, watching, silent and cold. In the shadows, revenge was brewing. And before the night was over, Lisa would learn that some victories came at a terrible price. Lisa had always known she was good, but that night, she had proven she was unstoppable. Since childhood, words had been her weapon, her shield, her sanctuary. When others stumbled over their thoughts, she crafted verses that flowed like water, sharp and unyielding. Her talent was a beacon, impossible to ignore, and that night, it burned brighter than ever. The underground rap scene in Mount Hermon was ruthless, dominated by men who believed battle rap was their territory. Lisa had stepped onto that stage knowing the odds were against her, but she didn't care. She wasn't just there to compete, she was there to claim her place. She didn't just win. She humiliated them, exposing every flaw in their verses, every weakness in their delivery. The crowd had roared in approval, their energy feeding her fire. But with every cheer, the resentment in the shadows deepened. Roby Donald, Darrell Cannon, and Carlos LaBounty had walked into that battle confident, sure that their words would bury her. But instead, they had been the ones buried. The moment Lisa delivered her final line, sealing their defeat, she saw it, the flicker of something dangerous in their eyes. She had crossed an invisible line, one she hadn't known existed. In her world, battles were fought with words, and the best wordsmith won. But in their world, humiliation demanded retribution. Their pride had been shattered, their egos bruised beyond repair. And for men like them, there was only one way to restore their honor. As Lisa walked off the stage, she felt the weight of their stares, heavy with unspoken threats. She had outshined them, her light too blinding, too unforgiving. And now, she was a target. What started as laughter and applause soon faded into murmurs of discontent. The three men huddled together, their whispers laced with venom. To them, it wasn't just about losing. It was humiliation. And humiliation demanded retribution. Roby clenched his fists, his jaw tight with barely contained rage. "She made fools of us," he muttered. Darrell exhaled sharply, his pride bruised beyond repair. "We can't let this slide." Carlos, usually the quietest of the group, nodded in agreement. They had built their reputation on fear, on dominance. Being bested by a woman, no, being humiliated, was something they would never let stand. The air around them crackled with unspoken violence. The city lights flickered above, indifferent to the storm brewing beneath them. The streets were alive with movement, but within their circle, a dangerous silence settled. "We need to act fast," Darrell said, his voice low but firm. "Before people forget." Before she thinks she's untouchable. Roby's lips curled into a cold smirk. We won't just get even. We'll make sure she never steps on a stage again. Their plan formed in the hushed, angry tones of wounded egos. They would invite her out, make her think it was all in good fun. Lower her guard. And then they would remind her that some lines weren't meant to be crossed. Beneath the neon glow of the streets, the storm gathered strength. Lisa had unknowingly stepped into its path. And soon, it would consume her. Lisa was still riding the high of her victory when she received the message. It was from Daryl. Yo, you killed it tonight. We gotta celebrate. Meet us at the spot in an hour. She hesitated for a moment, the words lingering on her screen. The men had been sore losers, but maybe they had cooled off. Maybe they respected her skill now. Besides, this was the rap game. Trash talk and rivalry were part of the culture. It was all about the music, wasn't it? She replied. Bet. Where at? The response was almost instant. An address on the outskirts of town, a place she didn't recognize. A small warning whispered in her mind, but she pushed it aside. She had been winning battles since she was a kid. She wasn't scared of them. If they wanted to call a truce, she would hear them out. Dressing casually in jeans and a hoodie, Lisa grabbed her keys and headed out. The night was still alive with music and laughter, but as she left the city streets, the lights grew dimmer, the roads quieter. The address led her to an empty lot, an abandoned warehouse looming in the shadows. She parked, stepping out cautiously. Yo, Daryl? She called, her voice echoing against the steel walls. A shuffle in the darkness. Then, Roby and Carlos stepped into view, their expressions unreadable. Daryl emerged last, a slow smirk spreading across his face. Something in the air changed. The laughter from earlier was gone. The friendly rivalry she had imagined didn't exist. The cold realization crept up her spine. She wasn't here to celebrate. She was walking into a trap. Lisa took a step back, but the crunch of gravel beneath her feet sounded too loud in the silence. Her heart pounded as she scanned the area. The streetlights from the main road barely reached the lot, casting long shadows against the rusted warehouse walls. Daryl took a slow step forward. You nervous, Lisa? His voice was almost mocking, but there was something more behind it, something darker. I just didn't expect the party to be this empty, Lisa said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Carlos let out a low chuckle. Roby, however, didn't laugh. He only stared, his eyes cold and unreadable. Before Lisa could react, Roby reached behind him and pulled out a gun. The metallic gleam under the faint moonlight sent a chill down her spine. Panic surged through her, but she masked it with defiance. What is this? She asked, her voice sharp. You mad 'cause I out-rapped you? Roby's grip on the gun tightened. You embarrassed us. Lisa swallowed hard. So what? You lost. That's how battles go. Daryl shook his head. Nah. It ain't that simple. He gestured around. Out here, respect means everything. And you took ours. Lisa's mind raced. She could run, but they would be faster. She could fight, but they were three, and she was alone. Let's just talk, she said, keeping her hands visible. You want respect? Killing me won't get it back. Roby took another step closer, the gun now level with her chest. Who said anything about killing? Lisa's blood turned to ice. The way he said it, so calm, so certain, whatever they had planned, death might have been mercy in comparison. Lisa's breath came in quick, shallow bursts. The night air was thick, suffocating, pressing against her like an unseen force. Her mind screamed for her to move, to run, to fight, but her body felt frozen. The three men surrounded her, their faces unreadable, their intentions clear. Daryl stepped closer, his smirk widening. You talk big, Lisa. Let's see if you can back it up now. Roby cocked the gun. Get in the car. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the dark streets beyond the lot. No one was around. No one would hear her scream. No, Roby barked, pressing the cold barrel against her ribs. Lisa clenched her fists. She had no choice. Slowly, she moved toward the car, her heart pounding like a war drum. Carlos opened the door, and she slid into the back seat, her pulse racing. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate. As the car pulled away from the lot, Lisa stared out the window, memorizing every turn, every street sign. She didn't know where they were taking her, but she knew one thing for sure: this was a place without mercy. Minutes stretched into eternity as they drove through deserted streets. The city disappeared behind them, replaced by vast emptiness. A sinking feeling settled in Lisa's stomach. The further they went, the less hope she had of making it back alive. Every instinct screamed that she was heading towards something far worse than she had imagined. The first punch sent her to the ground with the force of a hammer, her body crumpling like paper beneath the weight of it. Pain exploded through her jaw, radiating down her spine as she tasted blood on her tongue. The cold, unyielding gravel bit into her palms, sharp and unforgiving. Laughter echoed around her, twisted and cruel, wrapping around her like chains. The night air, once crisp and silent, now carried the stench of sweat, fear, and something far worse: helplessness. She tried to move, to push herself up, but before she could find her footing, a boot slammed into her ribs. A sickening crack filled her ears, followed by the agonizing rush of breath fleeing her lungs. She gasped, choking on nothing, the world spinning as her body betrayed her. The pain was unlike anything she had ever known, deep, shattering, consuming. Tears blurred her vision, streaking hot down her dirt-streaked face. She had fought before, fought with words, slicing through insults and cruelty like a blade. Words had been her armor, her weapon, her only defense in a world that never wanted her. But this was different. This was a language she did not understand, a brutal dialect of fists and bullets, of blood and broken bones. And here, in the middle of the night, surrounded by shadows that sneered and fists that did not hesitate, she realized something horrifying. She did not know how to fight back. The first gunshot shattered the night, a deafening crack that sent a burning pain through Lisa's body. She gasped, stumbling as her legs gave out beneath her. The cold dirt met her with a harsh embrace, her fingers clawing at the ground as if she could hold on to life itself. Then came the second shot, slicing into her side. She barely had time to register the pain before the third, fourth, and fifth followed in quick succession. Each bullet tore through her like fire, her body convulsing with every impact. The night had no mercy. Lisa tried to scream, but the pain stole her voice, leaving her with only ragged gasps. The weight of death pressed against her, suffocating, inescapable. The metallic scent of blood filled her nostrils, mixing with the damp earth beneath her. Darryl stepped closer, his gun still raised. The moonlight revealed no hesitation in his eyes, no regret, only the cold satisfaction of vengeance. Carlos stood by, his lips pressed into a thin line, while Roby lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply. "You should have stayed in your lane," Roby muttered. A final shot rang out. Lisa's body jerked before falling still. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying away the echoes of the violence that had just unfolded. Then, the three men turned and walked away, leaving her broken body beneath the stars. Darkness crept in, wrapping around Lisa like a suffocating shroud. The world blurred at the edges, fading. She was still alive. But barely. The sound of footsteps faded, swallowed by the endless stretch of darkness. Lisa lay motionless, her body trembling as blood seeped into the dirt beneath her. Every breath was a battle, every heartbeat a distant echo of life slipping away. She thought it was over. Then she heard it, a spark, the crackle of fire as a match ignited. Roby stood over her, the tiny flame flickering between his fingers. His expression was unreadable, his gaze cold as he tossed the match onto her clothes. The fire caught instantly. Flames licked at her hoodie, crawling over her like a living thing. The searing heat jolted through her, pain unlike anything she had ever known. It wasn't just the bullets now. It was fire, consuming her, devouring her flesh. A scream ripped from her throat, but it was hoarse, weak. The night was vast, empty, indifferent to her suffering. Carlos hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. Man, we don't gotta do this. She's already dead. Darrow scoffed. Then it doesn't matter, does it? The flames rose higher, feeding on fabric and skin. The pain was unbearable, but it wasn't death that frightened Lisa. It was the thought of disappearing, of becoming nothing more than ashes scattered by the wind. Not like this. Summoning strength she didn't know she had, Lisa moved. It wasn't much, just a twitch, a shift, but it was enough. Enough to remind herself she was still here. Still alive. She wouldn't let them erase her. With one final push, she rolled. The flames clung to her, fighting to keep her in their grasp. But she kept moving, until the fire met dirt and began to die. She had survived the bullets. Now, she had to survive the fire. Pain was all Lisa knew. It wrapped around her like chains, tightening with every breath. The fire had left its mark. Her skin screamed, raw and blistered, the smell of burnt flesh lingering in the cold night air. The gunshots had done their damage, leaving her body broken, fragile. Every inch of her ached. But she was still alive. And if she was alive, she had to move. The world spun as she tried to lift her head. The dirt beneath her was damp with her own blood, dark patches staining the earth. Her fingers twitched, her body trembling as she willed herself forward. It felt impossible. Her muscles screamed in protest, her nerves begged for mercy, but she had none to give. She dug her nails into the dirt, dragging herself inch by inch. Every movement was agony. Every breath was fire in her lungs. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't die here. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear cars, the hum of life continuing beyond her suffering. The thought gave her something to hold on to. If she could just reach the road, someone would see her. Someone would help. Her vision blurred, darkness tugging at the edges of her mind. Her arms gave out beneath her, her body collapsing into the dirt. No. She forced herself forward again. 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 The night stretched endlessly before her, an unforgiving abyss. But she kept crawling, kept fighting, even as the world threatened to swallow her whole. Death reached for her, its cold fingers brushing against her skin. But Lisa wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Lisa's world was slipping away. Her breaths were shallow, each one harder to take than the last. The pain was unbearable, but worse than that was the cold. It crept into her bones, numbing everything, whispering that it would be easier to just let go. But then light. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness, their glow flickering against the trees. Lisa blinked slowly, trying to focus, trying to believe that this wasn't another cruel trick of fate. A car. Hope surged through her, weak but desperate. She parted her cracked lips, trying to scream, but only a ragged whisper escaped. Her body refused to obey, too broken to wave, too shattered to move any faster. The vehicle sped past. No. No, no, no. Tears burned in her eyes, frustration mixing with exhaustion. She was too late. They hadn't seen her. She had come this far, only to be left behind in the dark. But then, brakes screeched. The red glow of taillights flared. The car stopped. A door slammed. Footsteps, fast and urgent. A voice, frantic, disbelieving. "Oh my God!" Warm hands touched her, gentle but firm. A woman's voice trembled. "Stay with me, sweetheart. I'm calling 911. Just hold on." Lisa tried to speak, but no words came. Instead, a sob escaped her throat, relief overwhelming her pain. The night had tried to take her, the flames had tried to consume her, the bullets had tried to silence her. But here, in the glow of headlights and the trembling hands of a stranger, salvation had found her. She was going to live. Lisa awoke to pain. It wasn't the dull ache of exhaustion or the fleeting sting of a fresh wound, it was everywhere, suffocating, relentless. Fire burned beneath her skin, her body a battlefield of agony. She tried to move, but even the slightest twitch sent shockwaves of torment through her limbs. A groan slipped from her lips before she could stop it. She's awake! The voice was distant, muffled by the steady beeping of machines. Lisa forced her heavy eyelids open, light stabbing into her skull like a knife. The world around her was blurred, white and sterile, too bright, too unfamiliar. A hospital. Memories crashed over her like a tidal wave, gunshots, flames, the cold earth beneath her hands. Her breathing hitched, panic clawing at her throat. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be dead. A figure moved beside her bed. A nurse. Kind eyes, a gentle touch. "You're safe now, Lisa," she murmured. "You've been through so much, but you survived." Survived. The word felt foreign, almost unreal. She wanted to believe it, but her body told a different story. Her arms were wrapped in thick bandages, her skin marred by burns. Tubes snaked around her, machines humming, keeping her tethered to life. She swallowed, her throat raw, every breath a struggle. "How?" The word barely came out. The nurse squeezed her hand. "A woman found you. You held on long enough for help to come." Lisa closed her eyes. She had fought to stay alive, crawled through death itself. But as the pain consumed her once more, she wondered, had she truly survived, or had she only just begun to suffer? Lisa had thought the worst was over. She had survived the bullets, the fire, the night that should have claimed her life. But as she lay in that hospital bed, surrounded by sterile walls and the soft hum of machines, she realized survival came with its own horrors. Fear. It crept in like a shadow, cold and suffocating. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that dark lot, staring down the barrel of Roby's gun. She felt the heat of the fire licking at her skin, the cruel laughter ringing in her ears. She snapped her eyes open, gasping for breath. The nurse rushed to her side. "Lisa, it's okay. You're safe." Safe. The word felt meaningless. They had found her once. What if they came back? What if they knew she was still alive? Her heart pounded wildly as the door creaked open. A detective stepped in, his expression grim but gentle. "Miss Coulson," he said, "I know this is hard, but we need to talk about what happened." Her throat tightened. Talking about it meant reliving it. It meant seeing their faces again. "Do you remember who did this to you?" he asked softly. Lisa clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. Remember? She could never forget. Their faces were burned into her mind, haunting her every thought. "Yes," she whispered. "Roby Donald. Darrell Cannon. Carlos LeBounty." The detective nodded, scribbling in his notebook. They won't get away with this." Lisa wanted to believe him. But as the memories closed in, suffocating and unrelenting, she knew one thing for certain: fear wasn't just a memory. It was alive. And it was waiting. Lisa had always believed in the power of words. Words had built her up, carried her through battles, made her unstoppable on the stage. But now, words were all she had left. She sat in the hospital bed, her body weak, her spirit battered, but her mind sharpening like a blade. The detective's voice echoed in her ears. "They won't get away with this." She had to make sure of it. The next morning, with a notebook in her lap and a pen in her trembling fingers, Lisa began to write. Not a freestyle, not a battle verse, but the truth, the story of what had been done to her. She wrote about the dark road, the cold gun pressed against her ribs. About the way Roby had looked at her, like she was nothing. About the 10 shots, the fire, the way she had crawled through death itself just to be here. Tears blurred the ink, but she kept writing. She would not let them silence her. When the prosecutor came, she handed over the notebook. "Everything you need to know is in here," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. The woman flipped through the pages, nodding. "You're brave, Lisa." Brave. The word felt strange. She didn't feel brave. She felt broken, afraid. But as she looked at the pages she had filled, she realized something. Her words had always been her weapon. And now, they would be her justice. She wasn't just telling her story. She was making sure the world never forgot. She had won battles before. Now, she was fighting for something bigger. She was fighting for herself. The courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. Inside, the air was thick with tension. This was no ordinary trial, this was justice on display. Lisa sat in the front row, her hands clasped together, her breath steady but shallow. She had prepared for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare her for seeing them again. Roby, Daryl, Carlos. Dressed in suits, their wrists bound in cuffs, they looked different from the night they had left her for dead. But Lisa knew better. A suit couldn't hide a monster. All rise. The judge entered, and the trial began. The prosecutor spoke first, laying out the gruesome details. The jury flinched as they heard how Lisa had been lured, trapped, shot, and burned. The evidence was overwhelming: medical reports, security footage, Lisa's own words. Then came the defense. They tried to twist the truth. Said it wasn't planned. Said things got out of hand. They painted Lisa as a troublemaker, implying she had provoked them. The words stung, but Lisa refused to break. Then, the moment came. Call Lisa Cousin to the stand. A hush fell over the courtroom. Every eye turned to her as she rose. She gripped the railing as she took her oath. Her body was weak, but her voice was strong. She met the eyes of the men who had tried to silence her. They thought they had buried her. But here she was. Alive. Speaking. Unshaken. And she was ready to make them pay. Lisa gripped the edges of the witness stand, steadying herself. The courtroom felt colder now, heavier. Every eye was on her, some filled with sympathy, others with doubt. But none of that mattered. The truth was hers to carry, and she would not falter. The prosecutor approached. Miss Cousin, can you describe what happened that night? A deep breath. Then she spoke. She told them everything. The invitation. The unease in her gut. The empty lot. The way Roby had smiled right before pulling the gun. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. She described the pain, the horror of realizing she was going to die. The gunshots. The fire. Crawling through the dirt, the taste of blood in her mouth. The desperate will to survive. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed to lean in. Then came the defense attorney. So you're saying 3 men, without any provocation, decided to attack you? His tone was slick, like oil on pavement. Lisa's jaw tightened. Yes. You never insulted them? Never escalated the situation? Lisa's heart pounded, rage bubbling beneath her skin. I won a rap battle. That's it. The lawyer smirked. And yet here we are. Lisa felt the weight of his words pressing against her, trying to shift the blame. But she had already carried the weight of truth. She wasn't about to let it crush her now. She turned to the jury, her voice clear. They did this to me. I lived through it. And I'm still here. The defense lawyer hesitated. The jury watched her, listening. And Lisa knew, she had made them see. She had made them believe. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Hours had passed since the jury left to deliberate, but to Lisa, it felt like days. Every second stretched endlessly, the weight of justice pressing down on her chest. She sat still, hands clenched together in her lap. Across the room, Roby, Daryl, and Carlos sat in silence, their expressions unreadable. For the first time, they looked uncertain. For the first time, they felt powerless. Then, the doors opened. The jury has reached a verdict. A collective breath filled the courtroom. Lisa's pulse pounded in her ears as the judge called the jury foreman forward. A piece of paper was handed over. The judge unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the words that would decide everything. In the case of the state versus Roby Donald, Daryl Cannon, and Carlos LaBounty, we, the jury, find the defendants. A pause. Guilty on all counts. For a moment, the room was frozen in time. Then murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gasps. Cries of relief. Reporters scrambled to document the moment. Lisa exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had fought too hard, endured too much. The judge's voice rang through the courtroom. The defendants are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Roby's face twisted in rage. Darryl shook his head in disbelief. Carlos hung his head, defeated. Lisa didn't look at them. She closed her eyes and let the moment settle. They had tried to silence her. But the world had heard her story. And justice had spoken. The trial was over. The verdict had been delivered. Justice had been served. But Lisa knew that justice didn't erase pain. It didn't heal wounds. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The scars traced her body like silent reminders of that night, raised, uneven lines running across her arms, her abdomen, her legs. Each one told a story of suffering, of survival. She traced a finger over the largest scar, the one just below her ribcage where the bullet had torn through her. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive. Sometimes she wondered if luck had anything to do with it. Her body had healed, but the nightmares still came. Some nights she woke up gasping, feeling phantom flames licking at her skin. Other nights she heard the gunshots again, felt the impact, the weight of death pressing down on her. She had survived, but survival was its own battle. Lisa sighed and pulled her shirt down, covering the scars. They were part of her now, but they did not define her. Stepping outside, she inhaled the fresh air. The world moved on, people laughing, living, unaware of the storm she had weathered. She wasn't the same woman she had been before that night. That version of her had died in that empty lot. But the woman standing here now was something else entirely, stronger, unbreakable. Her scars were proof not of what had been done to her, but of what she had overcome. And as she took her first steps forward, she knew one thing for certain: she was not just a survivor. She was unstoppable. Lisa never expected her story to travel beyond the courtroom, but the world had been watching. News outlets picked up the case, turning her name into a symbol of survival. Her face appeared on television screens, in newspapers, on social media. People spoke her name with admiration, with sorrow, with anger. Strangers reached out, women who had faced violence and feared they'd never be heard. Survivors who had been silenced for too long. Parents who held their daughters closer after hearing what had happened to her. At first, it overwhelmed her. She hadn't asked to be a symbol. She hadn't sought the spotlight. But as she read messages from people thanking her for her courage, something shifted inside her. One evening, she sat in front of her phone, hesitating before hitting record. Then, she took a breath and began to speak. "I never thought I'd survive that night," she said, voice steady but raw. "I never thought I'd be here to tell my story. But I am. And I'm telling it because too many women don't get the chance to." The video went viral overnight. The world listened. They listened to her pain, her fight, her defiance. They listened as she called for change, for justice beyond just her case. Organizations reached out. Activists invited her to speak. Laws were discussed in her name. The ripples of her survival spread further than she ever imagined. She wasn't just Lisa Cousin, the woman who survived. She was Lisa Cousin, the woman who refused to be silenced. And the world was finally listening. Lisa had once used her voice to battle with rhymes, to command a stage with nothing but words and rhythm. Now, her voice carried a different kind of power, a power she never expected, yet one she could no longer ignore. She stood before a crowded auditorium, the stage lights warm against her skin. The microphone felt familiar in her hands, but this wasn't a rap battle. This was something bigger. Taking a breath, she began. "For too long, survivors have been forced into silence. I know what that silence feels like. I know the weight of fear, of shame, of pain that people tell you to keep hidden. But I refuse to be quiet. Not anymore." The room was silent, but she could feel their attention, their hearts hanging on her every word. "I am standing here today because I got a second chance. Because justice was served. But so many don't get that. So many are hurt and left to suffer in silence. That has to change. A thunderous applause erupted. Some people stood, others wiped their eyes. She had spent so long believing she was just one voice, but now she saw the truth. One voice could start an avalanche. After the speech, women and men alike approached her, sharing their own painful stories. Some whispered words of gratitude. Others simply held her hand, their silence saying everything. Lisa realized then that her survival wasn't just about her. It was about them. About every person who had been silenced, ignored, or forgotten. She was no longer just telling her story. She was telling their story. And she would keep speaking until the world had no choice but to listen. The courtroom had been her battleground. The verdict had been her victory. But justice did not bring peace. Lisa sat in her small apartment, staring out the window as the city pulsed with life. The men who had tried to destroy her were behind bars, serving life sentences. The world called it justice. The news celebrated it. People cheered for her strength. But when the cameras turned away, when the interviews ended, she was left with herself. The scars still ached on cold nights. The echoes of gunshots still rang in her ears. The smell of burning still clawed at her memory when she closed her eyes. Justice had given her closure, but not escape. She had won. So why did she still feel trapped? Lisa curled her fingers into fists, breathing through the weight in her chest. Healing was not a single moment. It was a slow, painful journey, and some days it felt like she was walking it alone. Her phone buzzed. A message from another survivor. "Your story saved me." "Thank you." She exhaled, blinking away the tears. Maybe peace wasn't something justice could give her. Maybe it wasn't something she would ever fully find. But her fight had helped others. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. She stood up, stretching her sore muscles. Tomorrow, she would keep going. Keep speaking. Keep fighting. The past would always be a part of her, but it would not define her. Justice had been served. Peace was something she would have to create for herself. And she wasn't done fighting yet. Lisa stood before the mirror, tracing the scars on her arms. They told a story, one of pain, of survival, of a battle she never asked to fight. But they were not signs of weakness. They were proof that she was still here. The world had tried to break her. The bullets, the fire, the fear, it had all been meant to silence her. Yet she stood. She breathed. She spoke. She had walked through hell and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. Outside, a new day was beginning. Sunlight streamed through her window, casting golden light across the room. Life had not returned to what it was before, and maybe it never would. But she was no longer the same girl who had stepped onto that stage on New Year's Eve. She was more. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through the messages from survivors, supporters, and strangers who had found strength in her story. Every word reminded her she wasn't alone. Lisa put on her jacket and stepped outside. The world stretched before her, vast and uncertain. But she was ready. Because flames had tried to consume her. Because darkness had tried to drown her. But she had become fire itself. And fire does not break. It burns. It rises. And it never goes out. Lisa Cousin was not just a survivor. She was an unbreakable flame. If stories like this speak to you, stay tuned. In our next episode, we'll explore another gripping tale of hidden truths, cruelty, and survival. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more. Have you experienced something that changed you forever? Share your story in the comments. Your words could be the hope someone else needs.